The slap echoed in the quiet suburban street, a sound too sharp and ugly for the manicured lawns and cheerful mailboxes. Sarah Jenkins stumbled back, the print of a hand already blooming red on her cheek. Kyle Sterling stood over her, his face a mask of spoiled arrogance. He was the son of the man who owned this town, and he moved with the certainty of someone who had never been told no. "Did you hear me?" he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You don't talk to me like that. You don't talk about me at all." A low growl rumbled from the porch. Max, a magnificent German shepherd with fur the color of sable and shadow, rose to his full height. His ears were flat against his head, his teeth bared in a silent, lethal warning. He was old, with a touch of gray around his muzzle, but the military discipline was etched into his posture. He took one step forward, placing himself between the boy and the girl. "Get that mutt away from me," Kyle spat, taking an involuntary step back. Sarah found her voice, a frightened whisper. "Leave, Kyle. Just leave." The boy's fear curdled into rage. He saw the dog not as a protector, but as another challenge to his authority. He feinted left, and as Max shifted his weight to track the movement, Kyle lashed out with his right foot. The boot connected with the dog's ribs with a sickening, wet thud. Max yelped, a sharp cry of pain that was cut short as he collapsed, his legs buckling beneath him. He tried to rise, his loyal eyes still fixed on Sarah, but he could only whimper, his breathing shallow and ragged. The cruelty of the act shattered Sarah's fear. "Max!" she screamed, dropping to her knees beside her fallen friend. Kyle laughed. It was a hollow, ugly sound. "That's what happens when you don't listen." He raised his hand again, ready to strike her as she knelt, helpless and weeping over her dog. A voice cut through the air, quiet but carrying the weight of command. "Let go." John Creed stood at the edge of the lawn. He had just gotten out of his truck, the engine still ticking as it cooled. He wore jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, but his stance was a weapon in itself. He was not a large man, but he was dense with the tightly coiled muscle of a lifetime of hard use. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were fixed on Kyle Sterling. Kyle turned, startled. He didn't recognize the man. He saw no uniform, no badge, just a stranger. "Who the hell are you?" Kyle demanded, his voice cracking slightly. John didn't answer. He took a slow, deliberate step onto the grass. His movements were fluid, economical. Every ounce of energy had a purpose. He was a predator who had spent years learning to be perfectly still, and now he was choosing to move. "I said," John repeated, his voice unchanged, "let go of the girl." Kyle hadn't even realized he was still holding Sarah's arm. He shoved her away and puffed out his chest, falling back on the currency he understood. "Do you know who my father is? He owns this whole block. He owns you." John's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to the whimpering dog on the ground, then back to the boy. In that flicker, something cold and ancient settled in his gaze. "I'm going to give you 3 seconds to walk away," John said. 1. He took another step. "This is my property," Kyle blustered, but the confidence was gone, replaced by a frantic search for an authority that wasn't there. 2. Another step. He was now only a few feet away. Kyle could see the fine, white scars that crisscrossed his knuckles. He could see the absolute absence of fear or anger or anything other than a flat, professional calm. It was more terrifying than any rage. Kyle Sterling, for the first time in his life, felt the primal fear of an animal that had encountered a superior hunter. He broke. He turned and practically ran, stumbling down the driveway, and scrambling into his expensive sports car. Tires squealed as he peeled away, leaving the scent of burnt rubber and cowardice hanging in the air. John didn't watch him go. His attention was already elsewhere. He knelt beside Sarah, his movements gentle. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face as she stroked Max's head. He kicked him. I think he's hurt bad." John's hands were surprisingly gentle as they ran along Max's flank, feeling for broken bones. The dog whined, but did not resist the touch. He seemed to recognize something in the man, a shared history of discipline and pain. "His breathing is shallow. Probably cracked ribs," John diagnosed, his voice low and reassuring. "We need to get him to a vet. Now." He looked at Sarah, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the terror in her eyes, the terror of a child who had just learned the world was not a safe place. He saw the imprint of a hand on her face. He saw the name on the mailbox. Jenkins. David Jenkins. His teammate. The man who had died in a dusty village in Afghanistan. His last words a plea for John to look after his family. A promise John had intended to keep from a distance, through anonymous checks and quiet observation. That distance had just evaporated. He stood up, his decision made. He scooped the heavy dog into his arms as if he weighed nothing. Max let out a soft groan, but settled against his chest. "Come on," he said to Sarah. "We're going together." As she scrambled to her feet and followed him to his truck, she looked up at the stranger who had appeared like a ghost. He moved with a purpose that felt unshakable. In the sterile quiet of the vet's waiting room, the silence was heavy. John had placed a folded blanket from his truck on the floor, and Max lay on it, an IV drip in his foreleg. The vet had confirmed 2 broken ribs and severe bruising. The dog would live, but he would be in pain for weeks. Sarah sat huddled in a plastic chair, her arms wrapped around herself. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a cold, trembling fear. John stood by the window, staring out at the parking lot but seeing something else entirely. He saw a firefight. He saw Dave Jenkins falling. He heard a promise made over the crackle of a dying radio. He had failed. He had stayed away, thinking his presence would be a painful reminder. He thought sending money was enough. He was wrong. There's a difference between providing and protecting. He turned and walked over to Sarah, kneeling in front of her so he was at her eye level. "That boy," he said, his voice soft. "Has he done this before?" She hesitated, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He bothers me at school. He follows me sometimes. The teachers don't do anything. His dad gives a lot of money to the school." John's jaw tightened. "And the police?" "His dad is Richard Sterling. He's friends with the chief. Everyone's afraid of him." John absorbed this information without expression. It was a tactical assessment of a corrupt battlefield. He had seen it before in foreign countries. He had not expected to find it here, in the town where his friend had grown up. He looked at the fading handprint on her cheek. He looked at her tear-filled eyes. He looked at the loyal dog who had tried to defend her. "I'm John Creed," he said. "I served with your father." Her eyes widened. She knew the name. It was spoken in her house with reverence. The man who had been with her dad at the end. You're him?" "I am," he confirmed. He reached out, not to touch her, but just holding his hand in the space between them, a gesture of solidarity. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was a raw, unbreakable vow. "This ends today. That boy will never touch you again. He will never threaten you again. I promise you." She looked into his eyes, and for the first time since the slap, she felt a flicker of something other than fear. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling, but it was there. It was hope. She nodded, a single, decisive movement. "I believe you." His phone rang later that night. It was an unknown number. He answered it, putting it on speaker. "Is this John Creed?" The voice was smooth, cultured, and coated with a thick layer of arrogance. "Who is this?" John asked, his eyes on Max, who was resting on a dog bed in the corner of John's sparse living room. "This is Richard Sterling," the voice announced, as if expecting a gasp of recognition. "I believe you had an unfortunate encounter with my son Kyle today." "That's one word for it," John said, his voice flat. "Listen, Creed." Sterling's tone shifted, becoming condescending. "My son can be, spirited. He's a teenager, but he's a good boy. This little misunderstanding, it's best for everyone if it just goes away. I've already spoken to the vet. I'll cover all the expenses for the dog, of course. And I'm prepared to offer you and the Jenkins girl a generous sum for your trouble. Let's say $50,000? For your silence." John was quiet for a moment. He thought of Sarah's face. He thought of Max's broken ribs. He thought of Dave Jenkins bleeding out in the sand. Everyone has a price. That was the philosophy of men like Sterling. They could not comprehend a world that didn't run on their rules. "There's no amount of money in the world that can buy my silence," John said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet each word was as sharp as broken glass. Sterling chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You're making a mistake. You have no idea what you're starting. I own this town. The police, the courts, the council. You are nothing." John walked over to the window and looked out into the darkness. He saw the black sedan parked down the street, the one that had been there for the last hour. Sterling's surveillance. Amateurish. "No, Mr. Sterling," John said, the cold fury now a controlled, focused beam of energy. "You have no idea." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "You put your hands on the daughter of a better man than you'll ever be. You let your son injure a dog that has served this country with more honor than your entire bloodline. You think your money is power. You're about to learn the difference between a bully with a checkbook and a man with a promise to keep." "Is that a threat?" Sterling scoffed. "It's a statement of fact," John replied. "Stay away from Sarah Jenkins. Stay away from her home. This is your only warning." He hung up the phone before Sterling could reply. He knew what was coming next. Sterling wasn't a man who listened to warnings. He was a man who crushed dissent. The campaign of intimidation would begin now. John went to his closet and pulled out a heavy, locked footlocker. The combination was a date. The day his team had been ambushed. The day he had made his promise. Inside was not clothing, but equipment. A satellite phone. A small, hardened laptop. Surveillance gear. Things he had hoped he would never need again. The dormant hero was awake. The war had come home. The next morning, John accompanied Sarah to file a police report. The officer at the desk, a man with a perpetually bored expression and a name tag that read Henderson, listened with half an ear. "So," Henderson said, leaning back in his squeaky chair, "you're saying Kyle Sterling slapped you?" "And he kicked my dog," Sarah added, her voice trembling but firm. "He broke 2 of his ribs." "We have the vet report," John stated, placing the folder on the counter. Henderson glanced at it without opening it. "Look, kids get into arguments. And a dog, well, it's property. Maybe it was aggressive." "The dog was defending her," John said, his voice dangerously level. The officer sighed, picking at something on his uniform. Listen, Mr. Creed. This is a simple assault claim, at best, and it's your word against his. The Sterlings are respected members of this community. He said the word respected as if it meant feared. So you're not going to do anything, John stated. It wasn't a question. We'll file the report, Henderson said dismissively. It'll go in the system. Someone will look at it, eventually. John knew what that meant. The report would be buried so deep it would never see the light of day. This was the first wall. Systemic corruption, built on a foundation of Sterling's money. He took Sarah to the school next. The principal, a harried man named Thompson, listened to their story with a practiced expression of deep concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This is very serious," Thompson said, steepling his fingers on his large desk. "However, Kyle is an honors student. He's captain of the football team. We've never had any trouble with him." "That's not true," Sarah spoke up. "He harasses people all the time. Everyone's just too scared to say anything." Principal Thompson's smile became strained. "Sarah, accusations are one thing. Proof is another. Without witnesses, it's a difficult situation." "I am a witness," John said. Thompson looked at John, his gaze flicking over his plain clothes. "And you are?" "A family friend," John replied. "I see." Thompson stood up, a clear signal the meeting was over. "Well, I assure you I will speak with Kyle. We will handle this internally." He walked them to the door, his hand hovering near John's back, but not daring to touch it. "The Sterling family is a great benefactor to this school. They funded our new gymnasium, you know." The message was clear. The school was bought and paid for. The harassment started that night. It began subtly. A car driving slowly past the Jenkins house every hour. A series of phone calls with no one on the other end. Then it escalated. John was sitting with Max, changing the dressing on his bruised side, when a rock crashed through the living room window. Tied to it was a note. The writing was crude, block letters. "Leave, or next time it's not the dog," Sarah screamed. John was on his feet in an instant, moving her away from the window and into the hallway. "Stay here," he commanded. He moved through the house, checking the locks, his senses on high alert. He was calm. This was familiar territory. This was the language of intimidation. He documented everything. He photographed the rock, the note, the broken window. He logged the times of the drive-by cars and the hang-up calls. He was building a file. The next day, things turned uglier. A smear campaign started online. A fake social media profile pretending to be Sarah was created, posting vicious lies and doctored photos. Kids at school who were once her friends now shunned her, whispering behind their hands as she walked down the hall. Kyle Sterling and his friends would accidentally bump into her, knocking her books to the floor. Once, in a crowded corridor, Kyle cornered her. "Having fun?" he whispered, his breath hot on her ear. "My dad told you to back off. You should have listened." She tried to push past him, but he blocked her way. "Everyone knows you're a liar," he hissed. Before he could do more, the bell rang, and the flood of students separated them. Sarah ran to the bathroom, her heart pounding, and locked herself in a stall. She was being isolated, targeted, made into a pariah. John saw the toll it was taking on her. The fear was returning, eclipsing the hope he had given her. He knew he couldn't fight this alone, not through the corrupted systems Sterling controlled. The time for operating within the rules was over. The rules were broken. Clear's throat. It was time to call his team. He used the satellite phone from his footlocker, a device that couldn't be traced or tapped. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a voice answered, a voice he hadn't heard in over a year. "Go for Ghost." "Ghost, it's Creed," John said. There was a pause. Then the voice warmed with recognition. "John, hell, it's good to hear your voice. I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth. Everything okay?" "I have a situation," John said, cutting to the chase. "Domestic. A high-value target, corrupt infrastructure, civilian at risk." He gave Ghost the bare-bones summary. Richard Sterling, the town, Sarah Jenkins. Ghost was a master of signals intelligence and cyber warfare. He could pull a whisper out of a hurricane. A local tyrant, Ghost mused. "My favorite. What do you need?" "Everything you can find on Richard Sterling and Sterling Enterprises. Financials, communications, political donations, skeletons. I want to know who he owns. And I need eyes. I'm being surveilled, but it's sloppy. I want to know who they are." "Consider it done," Ghost said without hesitation. "Give me 12 hours. I'll set up a secure drop for the intel. You need muscle?" "Stand by on that," John said. "I'll call Tank if it goes kinetic." "Copy that." "John, be careful. You're on their turf." "It's my turf now," John replied, and ended the call. His next call was to a number he'd gotten from a veterans outreach group years ago. The man who answered had a voice that sounded like gravel and smoked cigars. "I'm Ben Carter." "Mr. Carter, my name is John Creed. I was given your name by the VFW. They said you were the best." "The VFW says a lot of things," Carter grunted. "I'm a lawyer, son. What's the trouble?" John explained the situation, the assault, the police inaction, the intimidation. He told him about Richard Sterling. "Sterling!" Carter spat the name like it was poison. "I know him. Slumlord with a good tailor. Thinks the law is something he can buy and sell. What do you want from me?" "I need a lawyer who can't be bought," John said. "Someone who will fight this pro bono, because it's the right thing to do. We're going to build a case outside the system, and when we bring it forward, it needs to be ironclad." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I was a JAG officer in the Marines," Carter said finally. "I hate bullies, especially rich ones. Send me everything you have. The vet reports, your logs, the photos. We'll make him answer for it." The final piece of the alliance was the one John dreaded the most. He needed the press. He needed a voice that could break through Sterling's wall of silence. Ghost's initial intel dump gave him a name: Maria Flores. She was an investigative reporter for a small, independent online journal. She had been writing articles about Sterling's questionable business practices for years, but she never had enough proof to make anything stick. He was too good at covering his tracks. John met her in a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop. She was sharp, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She was wary. "I've had people claiming to have dirt on Sterling before," she said, stirring her coffee. "They always back out. He gets to them." "He can't get to me," John said simply. He didn't tell her everything, just enough. He told her about a violent assault, a cover-up by local authorities, and a pattern of intimidation. He mentioned he had a team gathering evidence that would be unconventional. "I need a platform," he said. "When the time comes, I need someone who will publish what we find without flinching." Maria studied him, her journalistic instincts humming. She saw the quiet intensity, the lack of bravado. This man wasn't a crank. He was something else. "My whole career, I've been looking for a crack in his armor," she said. You're telling me you're going to give me a sledgehammer? I am, John confirmed. She nodded slowly. Okay, Creed. I'm in. But you have to bring me something real, something undeniable. As the new network began to work in the shadows, Ghost's intel started to flow in. He confirmed that the police chief and 2 town council members received monthly consulting fees from a shell corporation owned by Sterling. He found records of 3 other simple assault complaints against Kyle Sterling in the last 2 years, all of which were dismissed. John and Ben Carter decided to approach one of the previous victims, a girl who had worked at a diner Sterling frequented. Her complaint stated Kyle had cornered her in the back alley and assaulted her. She'd dropped the charges a week later after her family suddenly came into enough money to move out of state. Carter found her. At first, she was terrified, refusing to speak to him. But Ben was patient. He told her about Sarah. He told her she wasn't alone anymore. Slowly, hesitantly, she began to talk. She told him how Sterling's lawyers had threatened to deport her undocumented parents. She told him about the envelope of cash and the one-way bus tickets. It was another piece of the puzzle, a pattern of behavior, a strategy of silence bought with fear and money. The alliance was forged. The warrior, the hacker, the lawyer, the journalist, and now another voice from the past. They were a network of the righteous, moving against a network of corruption. But Sterling was not a man to sit idly by. He felt the pressure, the quiet defiance he couldn't stamp out. And like any cornered animal, he was about to get more vicious. The minor escalations were about to become a final, brutal assault. The breaking point was coming. The final assault came on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah had stayed late after school for a study group, trying to maintain some semblance of a normal life. John had insisted on picking her up, but she had told him the group might run long and she would text him. She wanted to feel independent, not like a prisoner. It was a mistake. As she walked out of the school's side entrance, Kyle Sterling's car screeched to a halt in front of her. He wasn't alone. 2 of his football player friends were with him. They got out, their expressions a mix of arrogance and menace. "Look what we have here," Kyle said, blocking her path. "Little liars all alone." Sarah's blood ran cold. The street was empty. The teachers had already gone home. "Leave me alone, Kyle," she said, her voice shaking but determined. She tried to walk around them. One of his friends, a hulking lineman, shoved her back. "Where do you think you're going? Kyle wants to talk to you." "I have nothing to say to you," she shot back, her fear giving way to a spark of defiance. Kyle's face twisted in fury. His father had been on him all week, furious about the reporter, Maria Flores, who had started asking new questions. He blamed Sarah. He blamed the stranger who had humiliated him. "You and your little soldier friend think you're so tough," he snarled, getting right in her face. "You're nothing. My father is going to crush you." He shoved her hard. Sarah stumbled backward, her backpack slipping from her shoulder and hitting the pavement with a thud. Inside was a small audio recorder Ben Carter had given her, just in case. She had turned it on the moment she saw Kyle's car. "I'm not scared of you anymore," she said, her voice rising. It was the bravest, most foolish thing she had ever said. The words broke Kyle's last shred of control. He lunged, not with a slap this time, but with a closed fist. The punch caught her on the side of the head. Stars exploded behind her eyes, and she fell, her head hitting the concrete. The world tilted, sounds becoming muffled and distant. She was vaguely aware of them standing over her, laughing. She felt a kick to her side, then another. The pain was a distant, roaring fire. Through a haze, she saw Kyle lean down, his face a distorted mask of rage. "This is your last warning," he spat. Then blackness. The call came from a nurse at the local hospital. "We have a Sarah Jenkins here. She was found unconscious outside the high school. You're listed as her emergency contact." John's heart stopped. He was there in 10 minutes. He found her in a small room in the emergency ward. She was pale, a large purple bruise swelling on her temple. An IV was in her arm. A doctor was explaining the injuries in a low voice. A severe concussion, 3 cracked ribs, extensive bruising. John didn't hear most of it. All he could see was her small, broken form on the oversized hospital bed. He saw the same sterile white sheets he'd seen 100 times before, covering men he called brothers. He saw the result of a promise he had failed to keep. He walked to her bedside and gently took her hand. It was cold. He stood there for a long time, the cold, controlled rage inside him solidifying into something new. It was no longer rage. It was a purpose, honed to a razor's edge. The calculated, strategic approach was gone. The rules were gone. This was no longer about building a case. This was about ending a threat. He looked up when Detective Miller walked into the room. He was an older cop, near retirement, with weary eyes that had seen too much. He was the one honest officer Carter had told him about, the one who hated the Sterlings but had never had the power to move against them. "I heard the call on the scanner," Miller said quietly, his gaze fixed on Sarah. "It was Kyle Sterling, wasn't it?" John nodded, his expression unreadable. "The kids who found her said they saw his car peel away," Miller continued. "But no one will testify. They're all too scared." John gently squeezed Sarah's hand. "They beat her. They left her on the pavement." Miller looked at John, seeing the coiled stillness in the man, the absolute certainty. He had seen men like him before, in his own days in the service, men who did not make idle threats. "The official channels are a dead end, Creed," Miller said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Sterling will have his lawyers all over this. He'll say she fell. He'll produce a dozen witnesses who'll say Kyle was somewhere else." John finally looked at the detective. "The by-the-book approach is over, Detective." He let go of Sarah's hand and walked out of the room. He pulled out his satellite phone. "Ghost. It's done." He put her in the hospital. The silence on the other end was heavy with shared understanding. "What's the play?" Ghost asked, his voice now devoid of any levity. "Scorched earth," John said. "I want to dismantle his entire life, his business, his reputation, his freedom, everything." "I've got something," Ghost said, his voice quickening. "It's big. Sterling's company uses a private cloud server for their off-the-record files. I found a back door. There's a folder in his personal directory. It's heavily encrypted, but I'm close." "How close?" "Give me until morning." John's next call was to Tank. The man answered with a simple, "Yeah?" "Tank, it's John. I need you." "Where?" Tank asked. No other questions needed. "Here. I'll send the address. We're going loud." "On my way," Tank said, and the line went dead. John went back into Sarah's room. A nurse had collected her belongings in a clear plastic bag, her phone, her keys, her backpack. He picked up the backpack. It felt heavy. He opened it and saw the small digital audio recorder. Its red light was blinking. It had been recording the entire time. He pressed play. He heard Sarah's voice, shaking but defiant. "I'm not scared of you anymore." He heard Kyle's enraged response. He heard the sound of the first punch. He heard the thud of her head hitting the ground. He heard the laughter. He heard them kicking her. He heard Kyle's final spat-out threat. He saved the file, making 3 separate copies. He now had the weapon. Ghost would give him the ammunition. Tank would provide the fire support. He sat in the chair beside Sarah's bed as she slept, the cold resolve settling deep in his bones. Richard Sterling thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn that everyone could be touched. Everyone. The reckoning was at hand. Ghost delivered. At 0400 hours, a secure file appeared on John's hardened laptop. It contained a single video file, decrypted and ready. The file was from a motion-activated security camera hidden in Richard Sterling's home office. The date stamp was from 6 months prior. The video showed Richard Sterling meeting with the Chief of Police and Principal Thompson. There was no audio, but the visuals were damning. Sterling slid 3 thick manila envelopes across his desk. The chief and the principal each took one, opened it, and glanced inside. They both nodded. The chief then handed Sterling a folder, which Sterling opened. Inside was the file for the assault complaint from the diner waitress. Sterling took the file, walked over to a paper shredder, and fed the pages into it one by one. It was undeniable proof of bribery and obstruction of justice. It was the linchpin. The annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala is tomorrow night, Ghost's message read. He's getting the Man of the Year award. The whole town will be there. The local news will be broadcasting it live. The plan formed in John's mind, elegant and brutal in its simplicity. They would use Sterling's own monument to his ego as the stage for his execution. John met with his team. Tank had arrived overnight, a mountain of a man with a calm demeanor that belied his immense strength. He was a logistics genius. Maria Flores came, her eyes bright with a mixture of fear and excitement. Ben Carter was there, his face grimly determined. Detective Miller arrived last, out of uniform. He was risking his career and his pension, but the sight of Sarah in that hospital bed had pushed him past his limit. "Here's the plan," John began, his voice low and precise. He laid it out on the floor of his Spartan living room. Ghost would hack into the event's audio-visual system. At the precise moment Sterling stepped up to the podium to accept his award, the video feed would be switched. Instead of Sterling's smiling face on the massive screens flanking the stage, the entire ballroom would see the security footage of him bribing the police chief. At the same time, Maria Flores would push the video, along with the audio recording of Kyle's assault on Sarah, to every major news outlet in the state through her independent network. The story would break everywhere at once. Ben Carter had the legal paperwork ready. Arrest warrants for Sterling, his son, the police chief, and the principal, all based on the new evidence. They just needed a judge to sign them. Miller knew one, an old, retired judge who owed him a favor and despised corruption. Tank's job was security and exfiltration. He would be inside, near the AV booth, to make sure no one could cut the feed. He would also provide an exit for John. John's role was simple. He would be the catalyst. The next evening, the ballroom at the Sterling Grand Hotel was glittering. The town's elite were all there, dressed in expensive gowns and tuxedos, drinking champagne and celebrating the man who owned them. Richard Sterling moved through the crowd, magnanimous and beaming, accepting their praise. His son Kyle was by his side, smug and untouchable. John Creed entered through a service door, wearing the simple black uniform of the event staff. No one gave him a second glance. He moved along the wall, his eyes scanning the room, marking exits, identifying Sterling's private security, tracking his targets. He saw Tank, also in a staff uniform, give him a nearly imperceptible nod from near the back of the room? The moment came. The mayor finished his fawning introduction. "A man of vision, a pillar of our community, our man of the year, Richard Sterling." The room erupted in applause. Sterling walked toward the stage, his smile wide and triumphant. He stepped up to the podium, basking in the glow of the spotlights. He tapped the microphone. "Thank you," he began. "Thank you all. I am so humbled." That's when it happened. The screens behind him flickered. His smiling face vanished, replaced by the silent, grainy footage from his own office. The crowd's applause faltered, turning into confused murmurs. Sterling turned, his smile freezing on his face as he saw the image of himself, the police chief, and the envelopes of cash. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. The murmurs turned into shocked whispers. Sterling's face went from confusion to white-hot panic. He frantically gestured to the AV booth. "Turn it off! Turn that off!" But Tank was already there, blocking the door, a calm and immovable obstacle. At that exact moment, every phone in the room buzzed with a news alert from Maria Flores's feed. The headline read, "Sterling Empire Crumbles. Video and audio reveal corruption, bribery, and brutal assault." The audio file of Kyle's attack on Sarah began to play over the ballroom's sound system. "I'm not scared of you anymore." The sound of the punch, the sickening thud, the laughter. Kyle Sterling's smug expression dissolved into pure terror. He looked at his father, his eyes wide with disbelief. The crowd turned on them, their faces masks of horror and disgust. The people who had praised him seconds before now looked at him like he was a monster. The ballroom doors burst open. Detective Miller stood there, flanked by 2 state troopers he had brought in from the next county. "Richard Sterling!" Miller's voice boomed, cutting through the chaos. "You are under arrest for bribery and conspiracy to obstruct justice." Sterling stared, his mouth agape. "You can't do this. I'll have your badge." "You don't have that kind of power anymore," Miller said grimly as the troopers moved forward, cuffing a sputtering, enraged Sterling. "Kyle Sterling," Miller continued, turning his attention to the son. "You're under arrest for felony assault." Kyle tried to run, but he was quickly surrounded and taken into custody, weeping like a child. John Creed watched from the shadows as the edifice of Sterling's power crumbled into dust in a matter of minutes. He saw the corrupt police chief trying to sneak out a side door, only to be met by another trooper. His work was done. He slipped out the way he came in, melting back into the night. Justice had been served, not the compromised, negotiated justice of a broken system, but absolute cathartic justice, delivered in the light for all to see. The aftermath was swift and total. The trials were a formality. Faced with the undeniable video and audio evidence, Richard Sterling's network of complicity collapsed. The police chief, the principal, and the town council members all took plea deals, testifying against Sterling in exchange for reduced sentences. Richard Sterling was found guilty on all counts: bribery, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. He received a sentence of 20 years in federal prison. He was no longer the untouchable tyrant, just a number in a system he could no longer control. Kyle Sterling, tried as an adult due to the severity of the assault, was convicted and sentenced to 10 years. The other victims, empowered by Sarah's courage, came forward to give impact statements, their voices finally heard. The town began to heal. The Sterling name, once a symbol of power, was now a mark of shame. A few weeks after the sentencing, John was on the Jenkins front porch, watching Max chase a squirrel across the lawn. The dog still had a slight limp, but the light was back in his eyes. Sarah was sitting beside him in a rocking chair, a textbook in her lap. The bruises had faded, but a new strength shone in her face. She was smiling again. A car pulled up to the curb. A woman got out. John recognized her as the wife of the disgraced Principal Thompson. She approached the porch timidly. "Mr. Creed?" she asked, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. John stood up. "Ma'am." I just wanted to apologize," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For my husband, for what he did, what he didn't do. He was a coward. He was afraid of losing his job, his pension. But that's no excuse. What happened to your girl, to Sarah? It was wrong. And we were complicit in our silence." John listened, his expression unchanged. He simply nodded. "Thank you for saying that." The woman gave a sad, small smile and walked back to her car. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement. A small piece of the town's broken moral compass being set right. A month later, John found his new purpose. He saw an advertisement for a local nonprofit that trained service dogs for veterans suffering from PTSD. They needed an experienced handler and trainer. He took the job. He found a quiet peace in the work. He understood the dogs, their loyalty, their capacity for healing. He understood the veterans, their invisible wounds, their need for a mission. He was helping them find what he had found, a new war to fight, a quiet one, a war for peace of mind. He was bringing soldiers home, one dog at a time. The story ends on a cool autumn evening. John, Sarah, and Max were at the local cemetery. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rows of simple white headstones. They stood before a grave marked with the name David Jenkins, Sergeant, U.S. Army, beloved father and friend. Sarah placed a small bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the stone. "He would have been proud of you," John said quietly, his hand resting on Max's head. "He would have been proud of you too," Sarah replied, looking up at him. "You kept your promise." John looked from the grave to the girl, and then to the loyal dog at his side. The ghosts of Afghanistan felt distant now, their voices quieter. The empty house he had come home to was no longer empty. It was filled with a new family, forged in crisis and bound by loyalty. He had come home from one war only to find another. But this one he had won. Not with bullets and bombs, but with a promise. A promise to a fallen friend, a promise to an innocent girl, a promise to himself. He had found his peace, not in the absence of conflict, but in the act of protection. He was a warrior, and he had finally found a home worth defending. They stood there together as the last light faded, three silent figures against the dying of the day. A quiet, unbroken line of courage, loyalty, and hope. The storm had passed, and in the quiet after, there was finally peace.